I'm a bit concerned about whether the people that would be going to see it, whether they'd be aware, well, they would be aware it's not Amy, but that there'd be no sort of human element to it.
He was painted as the villain in her life, the one who dragged her into addiction and never looked back. But now, at 43, Amy Winehouse's ex-husband has finally broken his silence. And what he's saying flips the entire narrative. Shocking secrets, haunting regrets, and a final confession that has left even her closest fans speechless. Was he really the enabler? Or was he just another victim of the chaos no one could control? The truth is out, and it's not what you expected. Everyone remembers how it ended, but only very few know how it began. Before we dive into what Blake revealed, we need to rewind back to the time when their love story first exploded into the spotlight. It wasn't only messy, it was magnetic. And what happened next had everyone asking, how did a rising star end up in one of the most chaotic relationships the music world has ever seen? The relationship that shocked the world. It all began in 2005 inside a smoky little pub in Camden, London, called the Good Mixer. This wasn't some glamorous red carpet encounter or a carefully arranged industry event. It was two people drawn to each other in a place where musicians, misfits, and creatives often crossed paths. Amy Winehouse, the rising jazz soul singer with a voice that made people stop and listen, came across a man named Blake Fielder Civil. He wasn't a celebrity, not even close. At the time, he was working as a video production assistant. But from the moment they met, there was a spark that neither of them could seem to put out, no matter how hard they tried. Their relationship didn't follow any kind of script. It was messy from the start, marked by passionate highs and destructive lows. Amy later described it as a love so intense that it scared her. Within a few months, their connection turned into something heavy and complicated. They would break up, get back together, disappear from each other's lives, and then come crashing back into them like they were trying to prove something to the world. And the world noticed. As Amy's fame began to soar, especially with the release of her second album, Back to Black, so did public attention on her personal life. Blake wasn't only her boyfriend, he was the guy who started showing up in headlines alongside her name, and not for the right reasons. The press called him a bad influence. Fans blamed him for the changes they saw in Amy, from her style to her behavior. His name became almost synonymous with chaos. Tabloid photos of them stumbling out of clubs or appearing disoriented fueled public concern and fascination. The media couldn't get enough of it. What was once a private relationship became a full-blown spectacle. People questioned Amy's choices. Why him? Why someone with such a checkered past? The truth was, Blake had his own demons like past arrests, a reputation for partying hard, and a history of substance use. But somehow, Amy saw something different in him. And whether it was love, addiction, or something in between, she clung to it. Then came the wedding. In May 2007, Amy and Blake got married in a surprise ceremony in Miami. There were no paparazzi, no family, no extravagant white dress. It was intimate and impulsive, very much in line with how they lived their lives. She wore a short white cotton dress, adorned with a red anchor print. He wore a shirt and tie. It wasn't about the glamour. It was about them against the world. But marriage didn't smooth out the rough edges. If anything, it magnified them. Their union was passionate, yes, but it was also very unstable. The fights didn't stop. The public scenes continued. And behind the doors, things got darker. Their relationship was the kind that made people uncomfortable. It didn't fit into a neat little box. It wasn't healthy, and it wasn't stable, but it was real in its own complicated way. Amy poured that messiness into her music. Songs like You Know I'm No Good and Love is a Losing Game weren't just lyrics. They were glimpses into what she was living. You see, it's easy to say that their love was doomed from the start, but at the time, for Amy, Blake wasn't just a boyfriend or a husband. He was her muse, her heartbreak, and her anchor, all at once. And for better or worse, their story would become one of the most unforgettable chapters in modern music history. That relationship didn't exist in a vacuum. Amy was already navigating a storm of her own, one that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with the price of talent. Amy Winehouse's life and career in context. Before the tabloids, before the storm of flashing cameras and screaming headlines, there was Amy, a young girl from North London with a voice that didn't only fill a room, it grabbed it. Born in 1983, into a working-class Jewish family, Amy Jade Winehouse grew up in the Southgate neighborhood, with music woven into the fabric of her everyday life. Her dad, Mitch, drove a taxi, but more. Importantly, he was always singing Frank Sinatra around the house. Her mother, Janice, was quieter, but was also present. And then there was her grandmother, Cynthia, who had once dated a famous jazz saxophonist and encouraged Amy's passion for the old-school jazz sound. Amy wasn't the typical kid, and everyone around her knew it. She wasn't trying to be like everyone. Else, she was drawn to things that felt raw and real. At a young age, she was already immersing herself in the music of legends like Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, and Thelonious Monk. She wasn't merely listening. She was learning. Every riff, every phrasing, every subtle emotion became part of her toolkit. She attended several performing arts schools, including the prestigious Sylvia Young Theatre School and later the Brit School, both of which have turned out stars like Adele and Jessie J. But Amy was never one to follow a straight path. She had this rebellious streak, a refusal to be polished into something she wasn't. At the age of 16, she was writing her own music, performing in small London clubs, and crafting her identity as a fiercely original artist. Her break came fast. After some demo recordings started circulating, Island Records snapped her up. And in 2003, at just 20 years old, Amy released her debut album, Frank. The title was a nod to Sinatra, of course, but also to the blunt, no-nonsense way she wrote about her life. The album was jazz-infused, intimate, and refreshingly honest. Critics praised her songwriting and smoky vocals, and she was even nominated for the Mercury Prize. But Amy wasn't quite ready for fame, at least not yet. Everything changed with her second album, Back to Black, in 2006. Teaming up with producer Mark Ronson, Amy leaned deeper into the soul and Motown sounds she adored. Songs like Rehab, You Know I'm No Good, and Love is a Losing Game weren't only catchy, they were brutally personal. And the world noticed. Back to Black wasn't only successful, it exploded. The album sold millions of copies and won her 5 Grammy Awards, making her the first British woman to win that many in one night. But while the music soared, Amy's personal life began to spiral. The same media that once celebrated her talent quickly turned on her. Her struggles with addiction, her mental health battles, and the constant invasion of her privacy became public spectacle. Paparazzi followed her every move. Failed rehab attempts and canceled shows made headlines. And behind it all, there was still this incredible artist trying to navigate an unforgiving spotlight. Amy's style was unforgettable. Her signature thick-winged eyeliner towered beehive hair, and her vintage clothing felt both glamorous and gritty. It wasn't just fashion, it was part of who she was. Everything about her felt like a throwback to another era, but her voice, her lyrics, and her pain were very much her own. She wasn't perfect, but she was real. And for a generation of fans, that meant everything. While the world fell in love with her voice, behind the scenes, Amy was fighting battles no Grammy could fix. The descent, addiction, and turmoil. From the outside, Amy Winehouse and Blake Fielder Civil might have looked like another messy rock star couple. Wild, intense, and seemingly inseparable. But the truth behind the headlines was far more troubling. What started as a whirlwind romance quickly slid into something darker. A relationship tangled up with substance use, chaos, and a spotlight that never stopped glaring. Addiction wasn't just a part of Amy and Blake's story, it was the center of it, according to Blake. Himself, things took a serious turn when Amy saw him using asked to try it. That moment, he admitted in a later interview, was something he deeply regretted. He claimed they only used together for a short while, but even that brief time left a long-lasting impact. When Blake was arrested in 2007, Amy's substance and alcohol use reportedly spiraled out of control. Amy later said their entire marriage was basically built around substances. And when someone says that about their relationship, you know, things are far from stable. It's really heartbreaking because both of them were dealing with serious personal demons. But instead of pulling each other out, they kept sinking deeper in. Now, throw fame into the mix, and it becomes a whole different storm. The press couldn't get enough of Amy and Blake. Their every move was followed by cameras, their every mistake plastered across front pages. Paparazzi stalked them. Tabloid headlines painted the couple's volatile dynamic as toxic and reckless, and the public ate it up like a soap opera. Amy's raw talent, her one-of-a-kind voice, and her vintage style were all overshadowed by her personal battles. Instead of privacy, she got judgment. Instead of help, she got flashing cameras in her face. The constant media attention didn't only report on her struggles, it often made them worse. It's more like a person trying to recover while the world is watching them fall apart. Blake, meanwhile, was cast as the villain. In the public eye, he was the one who dragged Amy down. And to be fair, some of his choices didn't help. But their story wasn't black and white. There was a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, and a lot of gray areas. Blake's legal issues were another major turning point. In 2007, he was arrested for assaulting a pub owner and later trying to cover it up. He got a 27-month sentence and served about a year. However, he served 12 months of his sentence. While he was behind bars, Amy's life started unraveling even faster. Without him around, she was alone with the pressure of fame. her, addiction, and the constant chaos that seemed to follow her. She canceled shows, ended up in the hospital multiple times, and started missing more and more public appearances. Even though their relationship had always been rocky, Amy still cared deeply for Blake. At one point, she said she wanted to be with him again once he got out. That kind of emotional connection doesn't exactly go away, even when it's painful. But by the time Blake was released, things had changed too much. The damage had been done, and whatever was left between them couldn't be patched up. From the start, the relationship between Amy Winehouse and Blake Fielder Civil was filled with love. But it was the kind of love that burned too hot and too fast. Their shared battles with addiction, the pressure from the media, and the legal messes they found themselves in all created a perfect storm they couldn't escape. It's easy to point fingers to say who was right or wrong, but the truth is, it was a tragic story with no simple villain, just two young people, caught up in each other, caught up in fame, and caught up in addiction. And in the end, what we saw was a raw, complicated relationship unraveling in front of the world, and that left a lasting mark on both their lives and on the legacy of one of the most gifted artists of her generation. What happened next wasn't merely another chapter, it was the part where everything quietly fell apart, both in public and behind closed doors. The divorce and death. It's easy to romanticize a love story when it's wrapped in music, rebellion, and matching tattoos. But the truth about Amy Winehouse and Blake Fielder Civil's relationship is far less poetic. Behind the lyrics and late-night headlines was a love that had unraveled long before the public ever noticed. And by the time Amy won her Grammy and thanked Blake, who was watching from behind bars, their marriage was already falling apart. In April 2008, Amy made a confession that would shift the course of their relationship for good. According to court records, she admitted to having an affair and told Blake about it directly. That moment signaled a breakdown that neither of them could recover from. Shortly after, they started living separately. While the tabloids ran wild with speculation, the real story was simpler. Two people, both hurting, caught in a web of poor choices and personal demons. Though Amy had often publicly supported Blake, even during his time in prison, the emotional and physical distance between them was growing. What began as a whirlwind romance had turned into a chaotic cycle of addiction, arguments, and isolation. And while fans clung to the hope that they'd somehow make it work, the couple quietly drifted apart. In January 2009, Blake filed for divorce, citing Amy's infidelity as the reason. There were no fiery court battles or drawn-out statements. In fact, when the High Court Family Division in London finalized the divorce that July, the entire process lasted less than 2 minutes. Just like that, their marriage was officially over. By then, Blake had already started a new chapter. While in rehab, he met Sarah Aspen, and their connection turned into a serious relationship. Over time, the couple would go on to have 2 children together. But even with this new beginning, Blake and Amy's bond never fully disappeared. In 2010, reports swirled that the two had rekindled their romance. They were spotted together again, and there were rumors that they talked about getting married a second time. It was messy and complicated, but in some way, they just couldn't seem to let go of each other. When it seemed like things might settle, Blake found himself in legal trouble once more. In June 2011, he was sentenced to 32 months in prison for burglary and possession of an imitation firearm. According to court testimony, he was under the influence of substances during the incident. The timing couldn't have been worse. As he served out his sentence, Amy was spiraling again. After a few years of public battles with addiction, Amy had taken steps towards sobriety. She had gone through rehab, canceled tours, and even taken breaks from the spotlight. But by the summer of 2011, things took a turn. On July 23, 2011, Amy was found unresponsive in her London home. She was only 27 years old. The cause of death was determined to be alcohol poisoning. The coroner's report later revealed that her blood alcohol content was more than 5 times the legal limit. It wasn't an overdose in the traditional sense. Rather, it was a tragic relapse after a period of abstinence. Her body simply couldn't handle the sudden return to heavy drinking. Her death shocked the world. But for those closest to her, it wasn't completely unexpected. Friends and family had seen the signs: the pressure of fame, the pain of lost love, and the weight of addiction had all taken a toll. Still, her passing left a gaping hole in music, in culture, and most of all in the hearts of those who loved her. Because Blake was still in prison at the time, he wasn't allowed to attend her funeral. Instead, a small private ceremony was arranged inside the prison chapel so that he could say goodbye. It was a quiet, solitary farewell, far removed from the frenzy that surrounded Amy's public life and legacy. In the aftermath of Amy's death, grief quickly turned to blame, and much of that blame was directed at Blake. For many fans, friends, and family members, he had long been the symbol of Amy's decline. He had introduced her to substance use, they said. He had pulled her into the world. That ultimately consumed her. Her father, Mitch Winehouse, didn't hold back. In his 2012 memoir, Amy, My Daughter, he described Blake as a deeply destructive presence in Amy's life. For Mitch, the damage was deeply personal. He had watched his daughter fall apart, and he believed Blake had been a key part of that unraveling. But the truth, like most things in life, is more complicated. Amy's story is one that's been told and retold through documentaries, books, and late-night retrospectives. But somewhere between the tragic headlines and grainy paparazzi photos was a young woman who only wanted to sing, to love, and to live. And somewhere in that same fog was a man who loved her in a way that was far from healthy but undeniably real. Even now, more than a decade later, people still argue about who was at fault. But maybe it's not about pointing fingers. Maybe it's about recognizing that pain doesn't always have a villain. Sometimes it's just two broken people trying to hold on to each other in a world that never gave them a moment to breathe. Amy Winehouse left behind more than simply music. She left behind questions about fame, addiction, love, and loss. And Blake, whether people like it or not, will always be part of that story. More than a decade after Amy's passing, the noise around her legacy never truly faded. But what no one saw coming was her former husband finally stepping forward to share his side of the story. Blake breaks his silence. In 2023, as the world quietly remembered what would have been Amy Winehouse's 40th birthday, one voice that had stayed mostly silent for over a decade finally broke through the noise. After years of shouldering the weight of public scorn, Blake Fielder Civil appeared on Good Morning Britain and sat down for what felt like a long overdue conversation. With the kind of quiet, sincerity that comes from years of reflection, he peeled back the layers of a story the tabloids never got quite right. This wasn't a flashy interview. It wasn't defensive. It was raw, vulnerable, and, for once, not told through headlines. "I feel I'm the only person who's ever held any accountability," Blake said during the broadcast. His voice didn't carry anger, though. It sounded more like exhaustion. For years, he had been labeled as the villain in Amy's life, the man who introduced her to when her world fell apart. Everyone pointed fingers at one man, and he wasn't pretending he hadn't made mistakes. But now, at 43, he was asking people to consider the full picture. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He openly admitted to being a 20-something-year-old substance addict who was lost in his own chaos. He said plainly, "So I had absolutely no idea how to make myself clean, let alone somebody else who was a big cog in a machine for a record label. And there were vested interests in Amy carrying on performing." At the time, both he and Amy were in over their heads, entangled in addiction, love, and the intense glare of the spotlight. At this time, Blake made it clear he wasn't trying to dodge responsibility. He only wanted people to understand the situation with more honesty than the public had been given. When Amy died in 2011, at 27, the world needed someone to blame. Her father, Mitch Winehouse, openly held Blake responsible. The press followed suit, painting him as the toxic force. That led Amy down a dark road. To many fans, that was the story, and for a long time, Blake didn't challenge it. Until now. The substance thing is something that's been attributed to me for years. The fact is that Amy and I only used it together for maybe 6 months of our marriage. That was it. And before that, Amy didn't use substances. She smoked cannabis, and I did maybe 4 or 5 times, he said. In the interview, his eyes heavy with a mix of guilt and frustration. People don't realize Amy didn't do anything Amy didn't want to do. That line stirred some conversation. For Blake, it wasn't about deflecting blame, it was about acknowledging Amy's agency. Yes, she was vulnerable, but she was also a fiercely independent woman, one who made her own decisions and lived life on her own terms, even when it led to tragic consequences. Blake explained that their relationship was never about one person leading the other astray. It was more complicated. They were 2 young people, madly in love, but also both struggling privately, in ways that fame only made worse. Behind the wild photos, the messy headlines, and the red carpet appearances was a relationship neither one of them had the tools to handle. He also took a moment to reflect on how addiction twisted their love story into something much darker. There was no blueprint for what they were dealing with, no guidebook for how to balance love, fame, and addiction. And by the time anyone realized how serious it all was, the damage had already been done. What stood out most during the interview wasn't Blake's willingness to take responsibility, it was his plea for the world to let go of the simplified version of their story. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't trying to clear his name. He was simply trying to set the record straight, not just for himself, but for Amy, too. "I'll always carry a burden of guilt because I should have acted," he said. For so long, the narrative was locked in place. Blake as the destroyer, Amy as the victim. But in his own quiet way, Blake tried to challenge that version of events. Not to rewrite history, but to give it a little more depth. Because behind the headlines and the heartbreak was a real, complicated relationship. And behind the caricatures were two people who were human, flawed, and trying to find their way. As the interview wrapped up, Blake went further to say, "I love Amy, and she loved me too. If there was anything that could bring her back, I would, obviously." He still carries the weight. That much is clear. But in speaking out, Blake Fielder Civil gave the world something it rarely got during Amy's lifetime, a moment of clarity, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of healing. Now that we've heard Blake's side of the story, let's take a closer look at how Amy's life was brought to the big screen and how that portrayal stirred up both praise and controversy. The biopic, Back to Black, and its portrayal. When Back to Black hit theaters in 2024, it quickly became a major talking point among fans and critics alike. Directed by Sam Taylor Johnson, known for her work on Nowhere Boy and 50 Shades of Grey, this biopic didn't only retell Amy Winehouse's story, it invited viewers to step inside her world to feel the highs and lows that shaped her life. Starring Marisa Abela as Amy and Jack O'Connell as Blake Fielder Civil, the film focused a sharp spotlight on one of the most complicated and talked about relationships in modern music history. From the moment the film begins, it takes you back to Amy's early days in Camden, capturing the raw energy and promise of a young artist on the brink of superstardom. What makes Back to the Black stand out is how it zooms in on Amy's relationship with Blake, showing not only the passion but the chaos that came with their shared struggles. The movie explores their battles with addiction and the constant pressure of the media circus that followed every step Amy took. Rather than glossing over the darker parts, it paints a picture that's both stylized and deeply personal, mixing the glamour of fame with the grit of real life. Sam Taylor Johnson's direction gives the film a distinct tone, balancing moments of beauty and tenderness with scenes that show exactly how tough things really got. Marisa Abela's performance brings Amy to life with an impressive mix of vulnerability and strength, while Jack O'Connell's portrayal of Blake captures the wild, unpredictable nature of their relationship. Together, they make you believe in the complicated love story at the heart of the film. One filled with mistakes, misunderstandings, but also undeniable connection. But what about Blake himself? How did he react to this film? His reaction to the film adds a fascinating layer to the whole picture. For years, Blake stayed mostly quiet about the public's version of their story. Watching someone else tell your story on the big screen can be a strange experience, and for Blake, it was no different. In interviews, he called the experience therapeutic, saying it helped him see their relationship from a different angle. He appreciated that the film didn't just cast him as the bad guy, but showed the struggles they both faced. Still, he felt the movie didn't fully capture the depth of their bond or the reality behind the headlines. This perspective challenges viewers to think beyond the easy blame game and understand the complexities of addiction and love intertwined. As for how Back to Black was received, Opinions have been all over the place. On one hand, Marisa Abela's performance earned praise for bringing Amy's spirit to the screen without turning her into a caricature. Critics appreciated the film's rawness and its willingness to show the messy side of fame and addiction. But on the other hand, some felt the movie didn't dig deep enough into Amy's personal struggles or the bigger forces around her, like the music industry's pressures. The portrayal of Blake also sparked debate. Some saw him as unfairly vilified, while others thought the film was too sympathetic toward him. That split shows how tricky it is to tell a story as complex and sensitive as Amy's. Despite these mixed reviews, the film succeeded in bringing Amy Winehouse's music and story back into the spotlight. It sparked new conversations about who Amy was beyond the headlines: the gifted artist, the troubled woman, and the person behind the public persona. It also highlighted the toll that fame and difficult relationships can take, making us think about the human side of these celebrity stories. At the end of the day, Back to Black isn't another biopic. It's an invitation to look closer at a life filled with talent and tragedy, love and pain. And maybe that's the most honest tribute it could offer. After everything we've seen and heard, do you think Amy Winehouse's tragic story was shaped more by her own choices or by Blake Fielder's civils? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. To enjoy more content like this, click on the next video on your screen.